I swear to God. Heyo, it's the Harley Show. So, we're gonna do a story time about the time that my dad was a dipshit. So, I went with my mom to go see a comedian dude that like writes songs, and he does the same show every single year, but yeah, we always go. It's like a thing that me and my mom do. It's like a little girls trip date thing that we always do. And we went there, we did whatever normal. It was like 45 minutes away from like where we like actually live. And after we got done, we went to a Mexican restaurant. We were just chilling out eating, and this girl, we're gonna call her Bethany, yeah, we're gonna call her Bethany, texts me. And me and Bethany do not have a good past, like at all whatsoever. Saw her in the store the other day and I wanted to smack her, but I didn't because I'm a good person and my Gmail was watching and I would probably get frowned upon. But she always lied and manipulated and did dirty stuff with dirty people, and she went crazy. She went off the deep end. So she texts me and she says, "There's cops and ambulances at your dad's house." And I was like, okay, no, there's not. This is April Fool's. You're a bitch. So I'm not gonna believe this. So then I was like, are you joking? Like, are you kidding? And she tells me, no, I'm actually serious. This isn't fake. So I'm like, okay. So I text my brother and I'm like, dude, what's going on? And he's like, Dad started having seizures. We're going to this hospital. So I'm about like 20-30 minutes away from the hospital. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna finish my food and then I'm gonna go, because we hadn't even gotten our food yet, and I'm not about to, like, I had time. They weren't even like at the hospital yet. They were on their way to the hospital. Oh, and I don't live with my dad. My dad lives like 15 minutes away from me. And so I was like, oh my god. So after we get done eating, my mom drives me over there, and we were driving, and we get there. And as soon as we get there, my stepmom, my brother, and my cousin that I'd never met, I just met him like that day once I got into the hospital, had just gotten there too. So I go walking in there, and I'm like, what's going on? And my stepmom explains to me that he started having seizures, and so they called an ambulance, whatever. So in the midst of all of it, he goes, hey, this is our cousin. I'm just going to call him Jimmy because not using people's names. And so like, hey, this is our cousin Jimmy. And I'm like, alright, like, hey Jimmy, nice to meet you. Never heard of you before. And he's like, hi, nice to meet you. He was actually a pretty cool dude. He is a pretty cool dude, except he's kind of weird and clingy and works at McDonald's. And he's kind of a douche, but like not really. Anyways, we're sitting, the whole entire hospital like waiting room was packed. Like I could not find a seat to sit in. It was a Friday or Saturday night. I don't know. I didn't have school the next day. So we were just sitting there, and I was sitting on the floor with my brother, and we were just sitting there talking, and Jimmy was there too. And as we're sitting there, my stepmom comes out and she says it may be genetic, because my grandpa, who lives down in Florida, in the summer, they had found a spot on his brain, and he started acting really weird, and he was seizing and like all this stuff. So they're like, it may be genetic. So I was freaking out because a close friend of mine had recently passed away exactly a week before, and from epilepsy. And so they were telling me that he was epileptic and that I could be epileptic. And so I'm sitting there on the hospital floor crying my eyes out in a spot where I'm not even supposed to be sitting. And these ladies are in a room, like at like a desk, the discharge desk, where it's like sitting right in front of me. And they're like looking at me, and I'm like bawling my eyes out because somebody that I knew had recently died because of seizures. And they're telling me that I could have that? Wouldn't you be a smidge freaked out? Just a smidge. And so I'm like freaking out. My brother's like, it's fine, it's okay, we're gonna be fine. He's like, this is the messed up part. I have another half brother that I've never met. His name is, we're gonna call him Ben. And he's like 13, and he goes, well, maybe only Ben has it. it'll be fine if he has it, but we don't. And I'm like, dude, that's not okay. None of his kids should have that. Because my dad has 3 kids. He has me, Ricardo, Shilly Shally, and Ben. So he's like, it's okay if Ben has it. If Ben has it, like, we'll just hope that Ben has it. And we're like, no, dude, that's not okay. So all these people are staring at me. So I'm sitting there crying my eyes out. And my stepmom calls me and she's like, hey, he wants to see you. So I'm like, okay. So I go back there and he's talking to me. And at this point, I was already crying and it was just freaking me out. And so I walked back there and I was talking to him and he's all like, I'm not trying to be like really dramatic, but he's just a dick and he fakes stuff all the time. So he's talking about how, oh, everything hurts, it hurts. And then he sees me and he goes, oh, baby girl. He always calls me his baby girl. That's a completely different, I can't stand it. And he's just like, oh, you know, like, it means a lot that you're here, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, yeah, you're my dad. But in my head, I was like, I'm only here because I want to make sure that I'm okay. Not gonna So, they, while we're there, I was freaking out because my close friend had just passed away because of seizures, and so I started thinking about that again because I'm an idiot and I think about stupid shit like that. So I started crying. And he goes, it's okay, I'm gonna be okay, you know, whatever. And in my head, I'm thinking, I'm not crying because you're in the hospital, I'm crying because he died. I know that sounds horrible, but if you knew all the shit that man has put me through in the 17 years that I have lived on this earth, you would understand that I cared more about somebody that I've only met a couple times and didn't know that greatly more than my father. So, after that, I went back out to the waiting room and still sat by my cousins, and I was like talking to Jimmy, and we're sitting there, and I was just like getting to know him, and at this point it was around midnight. Was it around midnight? I got in there around 8 or 9, and then my stepmom comes back out and she goes, Ricardo, Shilly Shally, your dad wants to see you. And so he's like, all right, you know, whatever. He goes back there. And then he comes back just not even like 10 minutes later, and we're like, and he's like, damn. And we're like, what? You know, like, what's going on? And he goes, he started seizing again. And instead of my brother worrying about anything, he literally kept a straight face and walked out. He walked straight out. He didn't care. And he said, I could care less if he dies tonight. Anyways, so he comes back out. Jimmy comes back, and he's talking. And he's like, your dad has done so much for you, because Ricardo wasn't in the greatest. I only met Ricardo when I was 14, and he's a year younger than me. So I met him when I was 14, and I've only known him since then. And he moved into my dad's house when he was 15? Something around that. He moved in like a year or almost 2 years after I'd met him. He still lived with his mom about an hour away from where I live. And so he's like, your dad has done so much. Jimmy was telling Ricardo, your dad has done so much for you. He has been like so helpful for you. He's bought you clothes. He's given you a house. He's done all this stuff for you. And he's like, I couldn't give a shit what that man has done for me. He's an asshole. So he's not wrong. He's really not wrong. So after all this, it was getting really hot in the waiting room. And it was, you know, the beginning of April in Michigan. So it was kind of cold outside. So me, Ricardo, and Jimmy decided that we're going to go sit in the car in the parking lot while we wait for all this to, like, go down. We go out to the car, and we're sitting there, and Ricardo finds a pack of cigarettes. And Ricardo is a fucking idiot and decides to take one out to smoke it. He's like, he keeps going, take a hit, take a hit. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm not going to take a hit. And finally, I kind of took a hit, but apparently I went too far on the cigarette. Like, I'm not trying to be gross. Let's say this is the cigarette, and, like, your mouth's supposed to come to here. My mouth went up to, like, here. I put it in way too far. And he's like, oh, you wet-lipped it and all this stuff, and he was getting real mad. And at this point, Ricardo was sitting in the driver's seat, I was sitting in the passenger seat, and Jimmy was in the back. And so we're just sitting there talking, and Ricardo keeps telling Jimmy, he's like, dude, make your move, make your move. And I'm thinking in my head, I just met this dude today. He's my cousin. And no, you're not going to try and make your move. So, at this point, most of the people that had been there since I first got there had left. So at this point, it was around 3 or 4, and my phone had died, and my friend had fallen asleep before that, because, you know, she's a normal human being and fell asleep. So we're like, we're gonna go back inside, because it's probably warmer in there than it is out here. So we're sitting there, we go back outside, we go back inside, and nobody was there except for us. My stepmom was back with him in the room. And we're sitting there, we're just chilling, we're doing whatever, and the only seats that they had to like sleep on were like the seats that are like supposed to be 2 chairs put together. Hello. We put the chairs, they're like the 2 chairs that are like basically sat next to each other, but there's no like handle in between. That's basically what it was. And my brother took the only one that was available. So I'm sitting there like, I need to take a nap. Like, I am tired. It's 4 in the morning. I have been up forever. I just want to go to bed. So at this point, I sat in a wheelchair. I leaned it back as far as I could, and I fell asleep in a wheelchair. And I slept there for like maybe 15 minutes before my stepmom comes out and's like, hey, no, it's time to leave. And so we're like, oh, thank God, like, I can finally go home. And then she goes, is it okay if you just come back to our house? None of you have an iPhone charger. I want to sleep in my own bed, not on a couch or being bombarded by dogs. And I want to go back to my bed, like, just want to go home. She couldn't even remember how to get back to my house or where my house was. So we're driving down the main, like, highway thing. I don't know what exactly it's called. But we're driving down there. She's like, do I turn here? And I'm like, no, that's definitely not where you turn. You gotta go a little further. And she almost missed it because my dad was complaining that he hurt and everything. So we finally managed to get back to my house after, like, seemed like forever. And a couple of days go by, and in my head I'm like, okay, so what's wrong with him? Nobody ever told me what was wrong with him and why he was seizing, and if I could have it. So I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm like, y'all gonna tell me what's wrong with him? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, are you gonna text me? Are you gonna Facebook message me and be like, yo, what's happening? And nobody ever texted me or called me to let me know if I needed to get tested for it and what he had. Months went by. And it turns out it was because he was drinking too much. He drank so much. It caused him to seize. And he currently has drank to the point that he is killing himself. He is, how old is he? He's like 40 something, I don't know. But he's got, liver something or another. Huh? Cirrhosis of the liver? I think that's what it is. And, he's basically dying. He's killing himself every day because he's drinking. But that's a whole nother story on that. But, just long story short, he got me all worked up, and I spent all those hours in a hospital for them to tell me that I didn't have to be there for all of it. There's nothing wrong with me that I need to get tested for. And I had to sleep in a goddamn wheelchair while my brother was just being a douche. It was ridiculous. But yeah, that was my story time, and that was just trying to go to get the door, it didn't work. And so, yeah. Bye.